we see lawyers as kind of in there, tough and rough, but wouldn't it be great to see that the legal skills can actually be used to make a more peaceful harmony in your family, in your home, and with your spouse?
Attorney and TV legal analyst Lis Wiehl today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Yyou Thompson. Remember in the movie The Paper Chase, remember what Professor Kingsfield said?
You come in here with a skull full of mush, and you leave thinking like a lawyer.
So, can thinking like a lawyer help you in everyday life, in everyday situations? Yes, thinking like a lawyer can help you, says TV and legal analyst Lis Wiehl. She's got years and years of courtroom experience. Now, let's say you're trying to convince your boss to give you a raise, or having a disagreement with your spouse about whether to buy a new car, trying to convince your teenager it's best to stay in school. Lis Wiehl says if you think like a lawyer, you can win every time. That's why she called her 2004 book, Winning Every Time. She and I had a chance to talk about that book in that summer. In just a moment, our conversation.
They say what's old is new again. You're about to see if that's true as you listen to an interview from noted radio personality Bill Thompson's 30-year archive. Enjoy.
So here now, from 2004, Lis Wiehl.
Well, if the answer to this isn't too self-evident, for whom is your book intended?
For everybody, but not for lawyers necessarily. In fact,
theoretically, they should already know.
They should know this. They may have forgotten some of it from law school because they get too highfalutin when they graduate from law school. But I really think I'm going to have about every lawyer in the country mad at me because in this book I give away the tricks of the trade that lawyers know, especially courtroom lawyers know, in how to win their cases in the courtroom.
It is, once you lay it out in the fashion that you have, it is remarkably straightforward and remarkably simple.
Good. Thank you. I'm glad. I want this to be commonsensical. I mean, we shouldn't lose our common sense when we're jurors in the courtroom, and we shouldn't lose it when we're negotiating our day-to-day battles.
Do we just let emotions get the better of us most times?
Yes, of course. I mean, advocacy is a part of our lives, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, and there are ways to advocate. One is to kind of put your head in the sand and say, I'm not going to deal with this now. The other is to get very emotional. I've been there, done that. The other is to wait for our knight in shining armor to come help us. And the fourth is really what this book is intended to do, which is to give you the confidence to make your case in a nice, cool, informed, and passionate, but passionate only in the right places kind of way.
Well, I know people who can do that very well, except when it comes to themselves, because they're too close to it. You can't help but get emotional when you're talking about your own raise or getting your own children to do something. Maybe it takes somebody just one step removed from that process.
Exactly. Well, you have to step back a little bit. And I with my kids, I'm not above saying, look, mommy needs a timeout. She's walking away from the situation. And I've just trained myself to then think, okay, what's my theory of the case here? What's going on with the kids? What is it I really want to do? And if it's just because they're at each other's throats, then I will literally come back from my timeout, separate them in the room, and let them each argue. All right, what is your side, Jacob? What's your side, Danielle? And, let them, and I sort of am the arbitrator between them. So we have a kind of a nice little lawyer thing going on in the house.
Bang the gavel, I'll have my decision in 30 days.
Exactly. My daughter's new phrase is when I say that she's got to have a timeout or she's done something wrong, she says, I demand a lawyer. I demand an appeal. And there are no appeals from mom, the judge.
I was going to say, in your household, you are the appeal.
Absolutely. I'm the juror that they go to.
You're the Supreme Court, basically, of your house.
Right. But even with my kids, I try to empower them by giving them some choices. Some people would call it negotiation, but I'll say, for example, I'm oversimplifying here, but do you want peas or carrots with your dinner? I don't care whether they say peas or carrots, assuming I have both in the house. I'm just happy that they're going to eat their vegetables. But it makes them feel like they have a little bit of power. They have a little room to negotiate.
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because how is what you're talking about different from the books on how to negotiate and get what you want that way?
Because I think what this does, it takes it one step further than those fairly technical academic books on how to negotiate. This translates what lawyers know and use in the courtroom It's even one step further than negotiation, because sometimes, unfortunately, we can't negotiate in the trials of our lives. We know what our theory of the case is, and we have to have whatever that is, and this will get you there. It'll get you to anticipate what the other side is going to say. It'll get you to organize your discovery or do your homework so that you're prepared, and it'll get you to think about telling things in terms of a story, so that when you try to advocate and try to persuade, you're doing so in what I would say an entertaining way, but also a way that people can listen to. You probably didn't read Hansel and Gretel or The Three Bears before you came in here today to work, but you can recite that story. You know what that is. Kids learn stories, so do adults.
But you've got a great anecdote in the book about the first time apparently you used the boy who cried wolf story.
Exactly.
And, if you haven't heard a story like that before, that can have great impact.
Absolutely. Well, my son was sort of doing that. He'd, come back at me with something, and I sat him down and I told him about the story, and his little face just, oh, I see, Mommy. So if I ask you and tell you a lie, basically, then you're not going to believe me the next time. And I said, yeah, that's right. So don't be the little boy that cried wolf.
Now, is it always possible, though, to use the nice, clean logic of the way a lawyer thinks if you're dealing with somebody who is illogical?
But that is part of the plan, is you have to anticipate in your cross-examination what the other side is going to say, because you know who you're dealing with. You know when and where they'll become illogical. So then I talk about different times in which to approach such a person. For example, when I come in the door after a long day at work and I'm tired, I'm hungry, my kids know it's probably not the best time to ask me for that raise in the allowance. Let Mommy come in, let Mommy get her, her makeup off and her play clothes on, give her a bowl of ice cream, and then ask for that raise, if you will, that raise in the allowance. The same thing, even with a recalcitrant, juror, is pick a good time, and the book talks to you about that.
And when you say juror, in your case, you might mean that literally. You might be addressing a juror, but most of us won't actually address jurors unless we're on jury duty ourselves. Right. But we have quote unquote jurors every day of our lives.
Who decide our lives. If, for example, in the workplace, if you have a bad work review, do you go to your immediate supervisor, or do you make an end run around that person and go to their supervisor? That's picking your juror. Who is it that can give you what you want? In a consumer negotiation, do you scream at the operator on the phone who's not giving you your cable service that you want, or do you take her name very politely, get her number, because they usually have numbers attached, and then ask to speak to a supervisor documenting all the time what you've done? Again, the book outlines how to go ahead and pick your juror in life.
I guess the analogy there would be the lawyer trying to make his closing argument to the bailiff.
Exactly. It's not going to go anywhere.
No, I mean, bailiff might find it interesting.
But it's not going to do you any good. They're not going to render the verdict that you want. So you've got to appeal to the person who actually has the authority. And don't all of us sometimes hide behind, well, I can't. I wish I could help you out, but it's that mean bad boss of mine. Well, you need to be thinking through that ahead of time so you can counter that, knowing, well, actually, I know who the mean bad boss is. I've actually spoken with him and gotten his authority. Whatever, you just have to anticipate. And the steps, they're not meant to be mechanical. You must do 1 through 8, boom, 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 boom. They're meant to be basic guideposts, because in some instances, you won't necessarily need all of the steps. But in those times when you're the most frustrated, when you're the most upset, when you're the most emotional, the steps give you something to hold on to. Again, it gives you that timeout. Okay, back away. What did Lis say I needed to look at here? And it gives you something to kind of hold on to for an argument.
Well, it's when you're emotional, you most need the steps.
Exactly. Well, it's like when you're in trouble, that's when you most need a lawyer. Same thing.
Yeah, and there are times when you will need that training. I keep thinking of Professor Kingsfield, who kept telling his students, you will leave here thinking like a lawyer.
Exactly. You will be thinking like a lawyer. Scary, very scary.
But and we were meant to watch that show thinking he meant, think like a lawyer in terms of, torts and things like that. But what he really meant was to be able to see all the contingencies, to plan ahead, and to know what your plan is going to be, so that if plan A goes wrong, you've still got plans B, C, and D.
Exactly. And that's exactly what the book is meant to do, is to help you outline those steps, just as Kingsfield would tell a law school student who comes in trembling with that nickel. Remember, here's a nickel, go call your mother. I don't want you walking out of the trials of your life with that nickel. I want you to be able to come back and say, well, if that doesn't work, let's go, as you say, to plan B or plan C.
Nickel won't get you much of a phone call anymore.
I was going to say, that doesn't do that anymore.
That really dates that movie, doesn't it?
Call on your cell phone anyway.
After this short break, what happens, Lis Wiehl, when both parties have a copy of your book?
Are you enjoying this conversation so far?
And would you like to get a copy of the book we're talking about?
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
When you make a purchase through our affiliate links, you're also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 2004 conversation with Lis Wiehl.
Now, I always have to ask, whenever somebody comes in with a book on either how to negotiate or how to win or how to deal, I always throw this, supposing husband and wife both buy your book, they both read the book, and they both know the techniques being used. I mean, do they cancel each other out, or does it make it that much better?
I was going to say it probably makes it that much better, because won't there be a little bit of humor if husband says, okay, wife, you're using step number 3 on me, I gotcha.
Because, I mean, ideally, you would love it if everybody bought and used your book.
Absolutely. I mean, because I really do think this sounds silly, but it's sort of interesting to think that what lawyers know actually can help us be happier people, because we see lawyers as, kind of in there tough and rough, and when we don't want to have, when we're in the worst trouble of our lives, we have to go to them. But wouldn't it be great to see that the legal skills can actually be used to make a more harmony in your family, in your home, and with your spouse, even with a sense of humor?
And there's I tell you what appeals to me so much about a process like this is the pure logic of what you're talking about. I mean, just the simple yes and no questions, the simple if this, then this, if this and this, then that.
Right.
I mean, there's a kind of a mathematical purity about it.
Right. And that then you can take away some of the emotion, because if I'm arguing politics with you or something, and and you've agreed to premise after premise after premise, and we come to a logical conclusion, you can't be mad at me because you've agreed on my little tiny bites up to that point, and you may still disagree with me, which is fine. That's what the country's built on, but you won't be mad at me. And that's what I'm trying to do, is say there's a way to argue that's logical. I always say the best cross-examination is not cross. The worst cross, when you've seen lawyers in the courtroom, and I've done it myself when I was a baby prosecutor, is I lose it. I know the guy's lying, and I can't get him to fall apart and say, I'm sorry on the stand. And it's so frustrating because I know he's lying. Sometimes you can't expose people's lies, but you can expose them as being liars.
But in that particular case, you're jumping to the conclusion without giving us the premises first,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. And then that was not a good way to do it. What I needed to do, and I learned later doing more trials, was I needed to back up and I would never get the guy to admit that, yes, he'd done the awful deed, but I could get him to admit to certain things that then in closing argument, I could take and wrap it up in my neat little package to convince jurors. But I was never going to get it from the guy on the stand.
Because in that case, real-life jurors, they are smart human beings, and they know if you ask him a question, he told a lie. You ask him another question, he told a lie. A third and fourth, fifth question, he lied. Then you ask him the sixth question, did you do it? And he says no. He's probably lying.
Or, for example, when you have somebody and you ask them one question, is the grass green? And they'll say, oh, the sky is blue. No, sir, is the grass green? Oh, the sky is blue. Let me write it out. Is the grass green? The sky is blue. And then I just look to my jury. In this case, it could be your family or your colleagues. And I just did with a raise of an eyebrow, you're communicating to them, well, this guy is definitely not going to tell me the truth. What you've done is you've exposed the person as lying or manipulating, even though they haven't actually said that they did the deed.
Mm-hmm. Now, we should tell people this is not just valuable in life and death situations. No. I mean, you've got a great story in here about a woman who works, I guess, in a gift store or card store or whatever she was. And she realized, there's only so many ways you can rearrange the jars of mustard, like to do something more, but her boss is kind of slow to the idea that she has of putting together a website.
And didn't want to spend any more money on what she was doing, and so the boss was concerned about money. And so my friend just said, well, look, give me a trial here. Let me just, because the boss didn't know about the internet really, and didn't really understand about the website. And then after a while, when my friend could show her boss, look what I've done with this website, look how many more customers we get in, the boss's eyes just kind of were wide open and was so thrilled both with my friend and the fact, of course, they were getting more business, and my friend just felt so much more satisfaction in her job.
So she argued her case to the jury very well.
Exactly.
So it must not have been much of a stretch, I'm guessing, to come up with real-world examples for everything you're talking about.
No, well, that was what's so funny is that the whole idea for this book was because I would have friends either in the workplace or my personal life or my kids that would ask me for advice, and I would try to help them through whatever it was. I realized I was using what came to be these 8 steps. I mean, it just sort of gelled for me after a while, that what I was saying are things that I knew from the courtroom, and that I could come up with an 8-step program, if you will, to help people through these things.
Wow. So has it ever not worked for you? I mean, if you do it properly, has it ever not worked for you?
so far, now that I've actually been able to put it together in kind of 8 steps rather than a mishmash, it does really seem to work. I've had people, for example, that don't know me. I mean, I've gotten emails from people that have no idea who I am, who say, I've picked up your book, I've used it in different situations with my children, and it's worked. I've had a nurse overhearing it being read to a patient in a hospital said, I've got to get that book. A friend of mine's cleaning lady said, I've got to get that book. A mom of my son called and said her 11-year-old was reading it. Her 11-year-old was reading it and saying, Mommy, this isn't boring. What better compliment than that is there?
This is not a boring book.
From an 11-year-old. Kind of scary, though, if he knows all the tricks of the trade of a lawyer at this age.
Yeah, well, it occurred to me that there's probably a lot of stuff in here that kids know kind of intuitively.
Absolutely. Well, I have an example in the book about my daughter who was arguing that she wanted to have a dog. And so I said, well, we've just moved and it's a lot of responsibility and everything. And so she said, well, we could let's have a hippo instead. And aren't hippos good pets? And I had to kind of walk her through that hippos weren't really good pets. And so she said, well, isn't a dog much easier, Mommy? They can get you every time.
Oh, did you walk right into that one?
Totally.
Lis Wiehl will be 64 later this summer. She still lectures and appears regularly on TV and radio as a legal analyst. Now, you can get your copy of Winning Every Time by Lis Wiehl by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. HeardEverything.com is where you can also find my 1990 conversation with noted attorney and agent Bob Wolf.
Most important, and I really dwell on this, is keep your emotions out of the negotiation. Keep your ego out of the negotiation. And don't get hurt feelings, and because wars start that way.
And my 2002 conversation with one of the best-known trial attorneys of our time, Johnny Cochran.
When I was 11 years old, I wanted to be a lawyer. And as I think back, I can only tell you that I loved to convince, to persuade, to argue. Because I didn't really know much about any lawyers until high school.
And, of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything. He was National League Rookie of the Year at one point, helped his team win the World Series, but within a couple of years, his life and career were falling apart due to alcohol and cocaine abuse. My 1989 conversation with former Rookie of the Year, Steve Howe.
I did not pitch, ever, taking the drug to pitch, ever. Now, many times I went to the park totally on a cocaine hangover.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.